So I was visiting with my parents over the weekend and we were talking about music and they asked me what it was that actually allowed me to get good at guitar. So I gave them my answer and realized that it would probably make a pretty good video. Ultimately, I think I'm able to narrow it down to 3 things that I did differently to the many other players that I knew growing up. The first thing that I did from very early on is get rid of the pause button. You need to put yourself in situations where you aren't in control, where you can't decide when it's time to start and stop. Now, I was lucky enough to start playing live music from a really young age. I think I was around 12 years old when I had my first gig, and I started off at school, then eventually started playing at a local church, and then played in a bunch of bands where we mostly did original music. The great thing about scenarios like those are that I wasn't in control. And this forced me to develop some really important soft skills. Things like dealing with making mistakes on the fly or learning how to rely on my ear. It forces you to problem solve and find solutions in the moment. And that's why it's so important to get out there and start playing with other musicians as early as you can. Now, I realize this just isn't realistic for a lot of people out there watching this video. So what can you do if you don't have other musicians to play with? The first thing that I'd recommend is to make use of jam tracks. So if you're working on a particular skill, rather than working on it with nothing else going on, no musical context, throw on a jam track and practice that skill along to the jam track. Another thing you should look into is getting a tool that allows you to slow down songs. So when you're learning a song, obviously you can't play it at full speed yet. So what a lot of people do is they sit in silence and they just work through each part, right? Well, if you have a tool that allows you to load the song in there, slow it down to a pace, it can be super slow that you can actually play along. It's gonna be less forgiving, but you're gonna be thanking yourself in the future. I know there's a lot of good free apps out there that you can check out. Now, the last and probably most effective thing you can do are practice alongs. These are usually pre-recorded or live videos where there's a guitar teacher sitting in front of you asking you to play along with everything they do. They're kind of like workouts. Now, I don't have any of these on my channel, but I did make 9 or 10 of them, I think, with my friends over at Guitario a few months ago. They're designed to be kind of like those old TV workout videos, if you remember them, where the instructor stands in front of you and walks you through everything you're supposed to be doing for the entire exercise. Typically, these are reserved for paying Guitario members, but they've actually given me a link for a 30-day free trial that you can cancel anytime. So if you want to check it out, there'll be a link up at the top of the description of this video. I'll also put it in a pinned comment. You'll also get access to everything else on the site as well. So they have a huge song library and a bunch of courses from guitar players like Ariel Posen, Mark Lettieri, Yvette Young, and Pete Thorne. I've personally known the folks behind Guitario for years, and they're really awesome people who care a lot about guitar and music education. So hit that link below, check out the workouts I did with them, and get your 30 days of access for free. The next thing I did was focus on creativity over memorization. That means that the majority of the time I was spending on my guitar, I was either A, writing songs, or B, working on my improvisation. Now, when it comes to writing songs for yourself, I'm not saying you need to be writing full songs necessarily, unless that's something that you want to do. But rather, instead of just memorizing a whole bunch of other guitar riffs that you listen to or like from other bands, sit there and try and come up with your own ideas. These can be chord progressions, riffs, licks. It doesn't really matter. It's just about flexing that creative muscle. For improvisation, that's pretty straightforward. It just means throwing on some jam tracks or songs and just noodling along. So for me, that started, all I knew was a basic major scale shape and a basic minor pentatonic scale shape. And I just sat there in my room and I just noodled around until I found it fit. I did this actually to the song Slow Dancing in a Burning Room by John Mayer, by the way. That's like a little anecdote. That's how I learned how to improvise. And I sat there and I just played. That's all I had. And I would play along to the song, improvise over and over and over. And over time, I realized that I could move those shapes to other keys to improvise over other songs, and eventually I learned how to expand outwards. I have a ton of lessons on this, by the way. If you want to get into improvisation, I'll put those under reference videos in the description if it's something you want to work on. One other thing I'll mention in this category, and this isn't something that I personally spent a ton of time doing, but if it's something that interests you, I think it's a great way to work on this creativity side of things, and that is looping. So if you have a looper pedal or you're planning on getting one, learning how to layer guitar parts, play some chords, layer stuff in there is super effective as well. The final thing that I did was I changed how I practiced. A lot of self-taught guitar players sit there in front of a screen with the tabs in front of them and they just work through songs that they like endlessly. And this is perfectly fine, but you're gonna notice you're not making a crazy amount of actual progress. Even if you're spending hours doing it, you need to be working on these other skills. And that's why it's important to have some proper guidance. So whether this is an in-person teacher, right, that's great. But again, if you're self-taught, you might not have one of those. But this can also just mean having somebody that you like on YouTube is what I'm trying to do with my channel, where that teacher covers these important elements of guitar that create connections between what you're hearing, what you're thinking, and what's happening on the guitar. So that means learning a little bit of theory, learning the basics of improvisation, learning how chords and keys fit together. This type of guidance was something I didn't have growing up, so I had to figure a lot of this stuff out on my own. I know if I had someone pointing me in the right direction, I would have made a lot more progress even faster. Something that I was really guilty of with my practice was doing these long binge sessions over the weekend. So I would consolidate all of my guitar playing for the week into just 1 or 2 days where I just play and practice for hours and then not touch my guitar during the week. What I started doing instead was I cut that up and spread it over the entire week. So that means 2 or 3 times a day, I would have 10, 15, 20-minute little practice sessions. And doing this is actually backed by science. There are lots of studies out there that say that cutting up your practice time and doing it in these more frequent but shorter sessions is going to give you better results. The last thing about practice that's worth mentioning is engaged versus unengaged practice. So engaged practice would be like sitting there with a metronome or a jam track and actually paying attention to every single thing that you're doing, kind of typical practice. But it's very important to make use of unengaged practice as well. And what I mean by this is taking your guitar, putting it in your lap, sitting in front of the TV or in front of your computer, watching YouTube, watching Netflix, whatever, and just noodling around. And basically all this is doing is building kind of these background connections between your fingers and the instrument. It's just getting you used to it. It's building muscle memory. And obviously this isn't gonna be as effective as your more engaged or focused practice, but the more that you play your guitar, the more progress you're gonna see. As far as what's next, I'd really recommend checking out those 10 guitar workouts I did with Guitario. I'm really proud of them and I think they're gonna help you a lot. You can access those for free at the link in the description. Also, I have a video that dives into the current practice routine that I use today. So if you wanna check that out, I'll put a link up in the middle of the screen for you. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.